Okay, thank you so much, guys, for joining. So, as part of the integration of MuleSoft with databases, today we are going to see how to fetch data from MySQL using query parameters, URI parameters, and headers. And after we see how to get data from databases, we are going to also see next class, we will see how to send data to databases from MuleSoft itself. And the project for this class, Get Data MySQL, is on GitHub. You can get it from there. And also about the W3 schools data, I have the data in CSV under the data folder in GitHub, as you can see here. There is W3 schools, so if you go there, you will get CSV data. And also, you can also directly import it to MySQL by just copying this code and running it in Workbench. Let me show you. So if I go here, I have it here, and so the CSV is under here, free MuleSoft developer course. Go to data, W3C school, CSV data are here. But if you but you can also directly import it by just executing this SQL script. So you go here, just click from here to the bottom, copy it like this, and bring it to here, and create new script, paste it here, and execute it. Then it will create W3 schools database with all these tables, all the tables that we have in the W3 website. So that way you can have the data in your own database and practice and document every step that you are practicing. Okay, don't save this. Next slide is so today we are going to see how to get data from MySQL, and we have 4 flows. The first one, it gets all the employees' data. Starting the second flow, which is the bottom left, we are getting data for a specified user ID. We pass the user ID either as a URI parameter or as a query parameter or as a header, and then we create a variable of the user ID passed in the request, and that user ID, we use it in our SQL script. We include it there for filtering the data in the where clause. Yesterday we use where to filter data, so we use where ID is the specified ID. And I have you can go over the slides. I think this should be self-descriptive to build it, and also download the project from GitHub and compare if you get stuck somewhere. Since I have it already built here, rather than building it again, I'll just spend time more showing what it is doing and discussing the concept. And we have questions, so please pay attention. This is very important. So in the certification, for example, what we are covering today, you can get at least 2 to 4 questions, somewhere around that. I'm saying this is important concept, so pay attention. Okay, so we have 4 flows, the first one, second, and 4 flows as you see. Let's start with the first one. So in the first one, as you see, this is just HTTP listener. It is get employees. The path is get employees. Then from the database module, if you don't see the database module here, just click add module and search it, and you will get it from here, and drag and drop it to this palette. So from the database module, we drag and drop select here. That's what I have done. Then after we do that, we have to connect MuleSoft with that database. So we come here, and for the connection configuration, there are a couple of ways doing it. Let's start with the simpler one, which is not optimal. Then we are going to see how to hide the credentials and use a configuration file. But first, let's just pass the connection credentials. So here in the database config, let me just click edit here to show you what I have done. So in the name here, database configuration, or you can call it anything you want. But the connection here, you can select. We see here, there is Microsoft SQL Server connection, Binyam, that you were asking me before. If you tested this one, we will test this and see together. I have tested MySQL and Postgres so far. So for MySQL, Postgres is not here. There is a generic way of connecting to Postgres. We'll see that. But for MySQL, you just select MySQL from the drop down, and then it has to install a library for MySQL, a driver. You don't need to do anything. You just click here. If it is your first time, you just click here and click add Maven dependency and click finish. Because what it does is from the internet, from the repository, from the Maven repository, it installs the required JDBC driver or some code that helps MuleSoft communicate with MySQL database. Then after you do that, you specify your host. It is localhost in our case because we are connecting to MySQL in our computer. The port is a default. If you don't change it, it is 3306. And the user also by default is root. If you didn't change it, then you pass your password and your database. Then you test connection. So if I click test connection, it says test connection successful, which means now it connects to my SQL database, and I can query data in the database or send data to insert data to the database. So this is how we connect. The first thing is connecting to MySQL. So once we do that, now if I come here for the connection, I just choose my configuration that I just configured. Then let me remove this. So in the first one, as you can see, we are just selecting all the data. Select star from employee. So if I go to we are connecting the Northwind database, which is this one. I hope you created this database in week 6 assignment. In one of the assignments, I added a video link of how to insert the database and the tables to MySQL and also to Postgres. So I have employee table here. As you can see, this is the employee table and it has these columns. So here we are just passing select star from employees. That means give me all the employee data. Usually this is not what we do in real world applications. We only query the data that we are interested in based on some filtering criteria or after aggregating and filtering it further. But this one is just show. So let's start with this default one where I'm not passing any ID or anything. So select star from employee. Then after that, okay. Okay. After that, I am just transforming the data to CSV. This is what we have been doing. So just the output, I want it to be in CSV. So that is our first flow. Couple of questions here that you have to pay attention, and we will see. I have 2 questions later about this. Is the data that comes from the database, in what format is it? When you have data versus when it is empty. We'll test that in debug mode. Okay, the second flow we see here is so here let me show you the path. I have employee ID as a URI parameter as you see it because it is in curly braces. Then this URI parameter, I am saving it as a variable here. I'm calling it ID and I access it by using attributes.uri parameters.employee ID. Then here, when I pass to filter the data for the specified employee ID, what I do is select star from employee. This one is what we did in the previous flow, where there is employee ID column here. As you can see, the columns of the employee table are employee ID, last name, first name, and so on. So there is employee ID, where employee ID equals to : given ID. So here what I'm doing is this colon followed by some string is a key, and you can give any name here, but you have to make sure you include a column before it, and that key, its value, you specify it here. So in this case, my key is given ID, and I'm telling it the value of the key, the value of the given ID key is vars.id. Vars.id is this variable that we created. Or in this case, we can even directly do it as attributes.ri dot employee ID. So to repeat what I just said, in the where clause, this is a column that exists in the employee table. So I did where employee ID is this key, and the value of this key, it gets it from here. So vars.id is a value. So that is what we are doing in the URI parameter here. When we pass query parameter also, the SQL query text and the input parameter will be the same. The only thing is the ID in now, the ID variable will be attributes.query params instead of URI params, the paths. If I show you the path, there is no URI param here. So we expect a query param. So from that query param, we are creating a variable using attributes.query params.employee ID. So otherwise, this code, it stays the same still. And remember, this given ID, it is key, you can give it any key. And also in here, you can put it within a string or within quote or without quote. It works fine in both cases. So after that, just transforming it to JSON so that it renders in Postman. Because by default, the data that comes from a database is in Java format. So the data that comes when you use select, the data that comes from the database is an array in Java format, and it doesn't render in Postman, so I'm transforming it to JSON for that. The last flow is a header. We expect a header. There is no URI param in the path. As you can see, it just get employee header. I'm creating a variable like before, but here we access the variable from the header using attributes.headers.employee ID. So if I have the variable now, this code still is the same thing. Select star from employee, for where employee ID is the given ID. So what we are doing is, for the ID that is passed to this application in the request, give me back the data from the employee table. Is what we are doing that. And we cannot just here say, for example, in this case, the headers, we cannot just put here attributes.headers, this variable that we have, attributes.headers.employee ID, we cannot just directly put it here. Rather, we give it a key name, and the value of the key name, we tell it what its value is in the input parameters. So we specify it in the input parameters box. So this is very important. Remember, in the where clause, there is a colon here. We give it any key name, and the value of the key, we specify it here. The other thing is, when we get data from a database, it is in Java format. We will run this in debug mode and show you it is in Java format. So we are transforming it to JSON and CSV so that we get the results back in Postman. So now let me run this in debug mode, but first let me just add logger here. So just add a logger here and add a breakpoint on that logger. Now save this and run it in debug mode. There are a couple of concepts that I want to make sure you understand them, including the data type, when there is actual data, when it is empty, or what is the data type, in what format is it, we want to see. So as you can see, yesterday we were just using select star in yesterday's class. If I go to yesterday's class, here, So we are using the same code that we ran yesterday. Select star from in place, as for example, as you see, or we have other examples where we use, for example, for this one is for where country is Germany. The only thing now in MuleSoft, what we do is we pass where country is, we do colon, and we remove this string. So this is a key, and the value of this key, we tell it what the value should be in the input parameter box. Okay, so now let me send a request and show you like the employee data. If I go to Workbench, this is employee data. Okay, employee select, rather than just employee ID, let me do select star. We show you what the data is there. So this is the data we have. There are 9 rows. So we want this data in CSV format. It will not be as beautiful as this when it comes to Postman. But let's send a request and see. I'm opening Postman. Let me get the path from here. The path is get employees. Come here, and I have it actually there. Let me create a new one. Remove this. And now I click the request. Since it is in debug mode, it is waiting for me to click next processor. So if I come here, this one we have seen it multiple times in the listener once. Oh, okay. Yeah, so here we see it has stopped in the logger. That means the select operation has been performed already. So what do we see? We see the payload. See, payload is here. We see size 9, and you can expand it. If you expand, you see there is an array. This, when you see data in this format, it is in Java format, and you see it here also. It tells it is application Java. So when you send select query to MySQL from MuleSoft, what is the data type? In what format is it? It is an array in Java format. Is one thing that I want you to remember. So this Java format, I'm transforming it to CSV. Let me add another logger. If we add another logger here, and not sure if this will work for this request, send. Okay, let me send another request again because the data has come, as you can see here. Okay, so click next. It is in here. Where is it? Let's start. Okay. Let me resume it. For some reason it is stuck. Probably it is because I added this logger after I run it in debug mode. Okay, anyway, so we started. Debug. So we said it is in Java format, and as you can see, it is an array. What if there is no any data? If it doesn't return any data from the database, if it is an empty, if there is no any value, what is the data type in? We are going to test. Click this here. Oh, by the way, we will have a break from 3:55 to 4:05 for 10 minutes. Okay, so send a request again. as you can see, we have 9 records. The data type is application Java, and it is an array. You can check that it is an array. Also, you can check by doing just here type of payload. If I do like this, it tells me it is an array. So it is a Java array. So we can have JSON array, XML array, or other arrays. This is a Java array. Okay, click next. Next processor, please. Okay, transform to CSV. Now this data has been transformed to CSV. Initially it was in Java format, but now as you can see here, it is in comma separated format. So this comma separated format can render on Postman, or it is readable, it comes here. So now when I click finish or next processor, I should get the data in Postman here. So there are, how many records do we see here? We see the first one is the columns, so still we see 9 records. These are the columns, including country, first name, and so on, birth date, and address, and so on, and there are 9 records. So that one is from the first flow, where there is no any filtering. The second one, in this one, we pass the ID as a URI parameter. So in here, we can do give me data from the employees. I want the data for employee with employee ID 1. So I just do /1 and click next. Get employees. Okay, let me get the path. It says it is not defined. Oh yeah, it is get employee because it is for 1. So I made it get employee rather than get employees. So let me delete S. Now I see data for employee ID 1. This is employee ID is 1, and we have all the data for that employee. We can also, let's also check for when we pass the employee, the ID as a query parameter. So if you go to the path here, it is simply get employee query param, and come in here to Postman, pass it here, and then question mark, we pass query parameters with question mark. It starts with query question mark, and we have to spell it exactly as we want to access it in the variable when we create the variable. So it is employee ID, I capital letter and D lowercase, I think here, as you can see, yeah, employee ID, it should be like this because I want to create using attributes.query parameters.employee ID. So when I do that, now you should give me data for employee ID 1, or let's make it 5, for example. If I do 5, as you can see, where is employee ID here? Country, first name, extension, employee ID is here, yeah, employee ID 5. If I make 8, we have 9 records, we have up to 9. If I do 9, you see there is employee ID 9 is here. If I do 10, there is no employee with employee ID 10, so it should return an empty result. As you can see, it is just empty. And the question I have here, so this is the second concept that you have to remember. The first one is when you send request to MySQL database, it comes in Java format. It is an array of Java format. And the second concept is, if it doesn't return any data, what does it return? If there is no any data in the filter, when you use in the workflows, if it doesn't match any criteria, what does it return? Does it return null? Does it return true or false? Or does it return an empty array? Is another concept that you have to remember. So as you can see here, this is a square bracket. So we use this for arrays. So this means it is an empty array. When there is no data coming from the request, then it comes as an empty array. We can also check this in here. Let's add a debugger. Let me first finish with header, and then we will check that. So for header also the same way, the path is here, get employee header, copy this, take it here. So now the employee ID, I have to specify it in the header here. So add a key and its value. So in here I type employee ID, and here let's say we put 8. So if I send now, it should give me data for employee with employee ID 8. Get employee. Okay, this is because I have that /. here. If I do like this, now you see the employee ID is 8. So it gives me the data for that employee. So in these flows, we saw how to send requests, how to use parameters, query parameters, and header. Now let's see in debug mode. Let's see when there is no data, when the select statement doesn't return any data, what format it is. Is it, we said in the output in Postman, before it showed us an empty array with square bracket. Now let's run this in debug mode and see. So in here, let me first stop this and edit the code. So what I can do is come here, and rather than just select star from employee, I can add where employee ID equals to 100, for example, or 1000. We don't have that employee ID because employee ID just we have from 1 to 9. So that means that will not return any data. So I want to, once we get the result, we want to check what the data type of the result is, of what it returns is. So save it and run it in debug mode again. Okay, so now let's send a request to this flow, get employees. Come here, get employees, send request. I don't need this header now. Send. I could not connect request. // here. Okay. So it is in debug mode. As you can see, it has come and it has stopped in this logger. So the payload now is of size 0, as you can see. And the type is, as you see, it is Java. But is it a Java object? Is it an array, or what is that? If I come here, in Postman, we got an empty square bracket. It is an array, but here also we can check just by typing type of payload. So you are telling me there is a payload and it doesn't have any data, but what type is it? It is an empty array. It is telling us it is empty of size 0, and if we just check its type, it tells us it is an array. So when you connect to a database, to MySQL database, you get the data in Java format. If there is, and it is an array, and even if it doesn't return any data, it will be an empty array. So that is our first part. I have a couple of questions that I want to discuss before our break. This one we'll see it after the break. Let me show you the questions I have. So this question, it says, a database connector is configured to select rows from a MySQL database. What's the format of the array? See, it is an array. What's the array? Its format. What format is it? What is the format of the array of results returned from the database query? So this is something you should remember. We have mentioned this a couple of times. Yes, so it should be
Java.
Yes, Java. Next one is, this one is not exactly, I mean, we can answer it also from the previous concepts that we discussed, but there is just, I saw this select statement and I brought it for that reason. So here, as you can see, let me make this slideshow. So what is it saying? There is CSV data, orders.csv, and it has only 4 rows, as you can see, and 2 columns, order ID and account on the bottom left. So the order ID ranges from 100 to 103, and there are account names there. Now, there is a flow, as you can see there, and what it says is, refer to the exhibitors, the orders.csv file is read, then process it to look up the orders in a database. So what basically what it is doing is, there is orders CSV data, then it gets the order ID from the CSV data, and for the order IDs, it gets other data from the database. The Mule application is debugged in any point studio and stops at the breakpoint. So there is a breakpoint which is at the select order row from account. So before the select statement is executed, it doesn't execute the select statement. So because the breakpoint is there. So what is the payload showing in the debugger at this breakpoint is a question. I just want to give you a sense of the different kinds of questions that you may encounter in your certification. So there is orders.csv, there is a file reader, the first one, it reads that. The second one, set payload, it is set to order ID of the first row. Order ID of the first row means we have order ID, the first row is 100. Then there is set variable, set order ID to none, this is a variable, and the order ID is set to none as a variable. Then there is select statement. So the select statement, it is included there so that it gets data for the order IDs in the order CSV. So what's the payload shown in the debugger at this breakpoint is a question.
100.
Okay.
None.
100.
None.
So okay. Remember, we have one set payload and one set variable, and the question is, what is a payload, right?
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the set variable just yes, yeah.
Very tricky question.
Very tricky, yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Next one. This one we'll see it in the next after break. Another question is, what payload is returned by database select operation that does not match any records in the database? Exception, null, empty array, false. Empty array. Yeah, this one is what we saw. It just returns an empty square bracket. So it is an array from the database. When you select operation, the data comes in Java format, and it is an array. Even if there is no data, it will be an empty array still. It is not null or exception. Okay. Another question. This question, because we have done this many times, I'm not testing it. You can test it for yourself. Take it as an assignment and test it either in your group or by yourself. So the question here is, a flow needs to combine and return data from two different data sources. It contains a database select operation followed by an HTTP request operation. Let's say, for example, it gets the data from an external application and also from another database, and then we want to combine them together to create some application. So the question is, what's the method to capture both payloads so the payload from the second request does not overwrite the payload from the first? So we have an HTTP request to get data from an external application, and we have a select statement to get data from a database, and how do we make sure we don't override, how do we make sure we retain both data sets or both payloads so that we can combine them is a question. And we have 4 bullet pointers. Read them and let me know your answers.
The payload from the database select operation to a variable.
Perfect. Yeah. So always in the different operations, when we get data from some connectors or some requests, there is usually under advanced, there is target variable. So we give it a name under target variable, then the payload will be as a variable, and we access it using that variable name, using vars dot the variable name. So this one you can test it for yourself. Just in the flows, add read CSV, for example, and read one of the CSV files that we were reading before, and without giving a target variable for the select operation, you will see the CSV file gets overwritten, the payload from the CSV file. Then next, give a target variable name here. Then you will see the payload from the select statement is saved as a variable. That way you retain the data from both operations and you can combine them. Okay. This one is kind of somewhat repetition, I guess. Refer to the exhibit, what gets printed to the console. So there is a logger. The logger, as we know, a logger prints to the console. And in the message, there is an expression, which is type of payload. So the payload in this case is get data for supplied employee ID. It is a select operation from some database. Now, type of payload, what should it return? Does it return Java, array, object? Okay, perfect. Yeah, it returns an array. Perfect. Whether it has data or not, it is always an array. It could be an empty array, or it could have one or more data objects, but it is always an array. Perfect. And okay, before our break, I want to talk about this assignment that I have put together. So this is to test your SQL skills using the diamonds data. So the diamonds data, we imported it in our last week. If you didn't, please import it. Going over the slides, or if you know Python already, also you can use Python using the steps Salam shared in the email or in Telegram, or you can also go over the notebooks that I shared last time. So make sure you have it imported in your MySQL database and answer these questions. And I would appreciate if you have study groups. I would appreciate if you can do them in the study groups and help each other. So this data is about diamonds, and based on the quality of the data, the diamond, based on its color and other attributes, its prices are different. So the question is by cut type, which one is get the frequency by cut type, get the frequency, get the average price by color, and then tell which ones are most expensive and which one is least expensive. And also by category, get the distribution by category and tell the most frequent one, the most frequent color, and least frequent color in each category. And the fourth one is based on color and cut, get the most expensive, least expensive, the most frequent, and the least frequent diamond types. So this helps you to practice more, even if SQL is easy until you practice it well. It has some learning curve, but once you know it, once you practice, you will find it easy. Okay. So I guess this is enough for the first part. Then in our second part, we are going to see how to use application properties. So application properties, we use application properties to hide our credentials. So this one, like in the connection here, when I connect to the database, as you can see here, I am passing explicitly my host, port, username, and password also here, and the database and so on. So how can we hide that is one question that we can answer with using application properties. The other thing is also if you have different applications that are connecting to the same database, and if the database credentials change, if you are statically coding it like this, you have to change all of them. But if you have one central file, you just change it in the central file, and dynamically all the connections will still work fine. So after the break, that is what we are going to talk about, using application properties when connecting to databases. So we have 4 minutes until our break, and I can take a couple of questions. So let me close this. Let me close this, and I have Q's database. Okay, this one. Q's database. I have 2 questions, I think. The first one is, get data for the provided first name and last name. Okay, let me show you the path here. There is get data, 2 URI parameters, first name followed by last name. Okay, in here I want to pass SQL query text to the select operation. So there is select star from, since this is already for Northwind, the connection, I think I can remove this one because I have connected to that database, from employee, where first name, I am putting colon first name and last name, colon last name. So the question is, if you go to the notes, I will push this to GitHub also. The question is, what should be provided in the input parameter box for this to work? So in the input parameter box, as you can see, there is no anything here. What should I do here? Can you share your code in the chat? Or what you can do is, you can go over the slides. Maybe if you don't remember this, you can go over the slides and come up with your answers after the break. So this is the first question. The second question is the where clause is missing. So in here we don't have where clause, but the input parameters here we have values here. So it's already 3:50. Let's have 10 minutes break, and we will continue from here. So we will meet. Okay. Oh, this is 3:50. Let's make it 15 minutes until 4:05. Are they query or are URI params? These are, okay, in here, the first one, let me show. The first one is, both of them are URI params. The second one, let me make sure, what did I put here? This is URI param, what did I put here? It should be, yeah, here also I have URI params. So, yeah. So these are URI params. In the where clause, what do I do here? Is that one question. If you have this field in, such questions are common. And the first one is the opposite of the second one. You have it here, actually. More or less, I'm showing this answer here, but I want you to assimilate it, to understand it quite well. Okay, perfect. So let's take 15 minutes break, and then we will continue from here, answer these questions, and continue to application properties. So the first question, this SQL query text part is complete. We just need to provide here as dictionary, just as an expression. You have to make sure you click FX, and then we have these curly braces. Then first name is, its value will be attributes dot URI parameters dot first name, comma, and last name will be attributes dot URI parameters dot last name. So this way we complete both the SQL query text and the input parameter. the second question in here, we have this one given already. Just what we need to do is add a where clause here. So where first name equals to colon first name, and we have to add and last name equals to colon last name. We have to make sure after this colon, this first name and last name, since they are keys, they should be spelled exactly like this one. This first name here corresponds to this key, and its value will be this one. Last name, this one is this key, and its value will be this one. So practice this. It is very important thing to know. Okay. Yeah, this is Anypoint Studio. Now we'll get back to application properties and okay, Asqual, go ahead, please. So from this week on application properties, this is the slide we have. Let me make it slideshow. So why do we need it? What are we doing? In this session particularly, what we are doing is you will have lots of credentials, one connecting to MySQL database, another one to Postgres database, or another one to a data storage service in AWS, another one in BigQuery, in Google, and so on. So rather than explicitly putting the credentials, static credentials, to the connection configuration, it is much better to have all your credentials in one file. It is called a configuration file. Then just use that configuration file in the connection configurations. So when any of the connection credentials change, you don't want to go to each connection and change it one by one, because you just change it. If you change it in the file, then since all connections refer to that file, it will dynamically update. That's one advantage. The other advantage is also it is more secure. You don't show your password and username here. So as you can see here, for example, in this screenshot, I'm connecting to I have two select operations. As you can see, I'm using a scatter gather. I'm getting data from Postgres and from MySQL, as you can see on the bottom left of the screenshot, and getting the data, combining them together, and so on. So I have two connection configurations to MySQL and Postgres. And on the right in the screenshot, as you can see, I'm using for host, I'm using $ curly braces mysql.host, and for the port the same thing, as you can see. So this way, in that file, in the configuration file, if I change my credentials, this will update, and it is also more secure. So this is what we are going to see next. So it is easier to manage connections when we use application properties. It is easier to manage connector properties, and it dynamically replaces static values. And there are two ways to create the application properties file. We can use either .yaml or .properties file. I know the .yaml is common. I have never used .properties. You can call it whatever name it is, but it should end with either of these two extensions. And now let's see step by step. Let's create how we can connect to MySQL and also even to our local HTTP listener also. So we create that file under source main resources. Let me first show you at a high level, and then we will delete it and create together. So this is a YAML file. As you see, it is config.yaml. Then, so YAML file is hierarchical data. We create it using indentation. So I have this MySQL root, and all of these are keys under that root. So if I do mysql.host, its value will be this one. if I do MySQL.password, because password is under MySQL, I can have another one here also. So local connection, or let me call this my host, and under that my host I can have host, local host, and the port, and so on and so on also. So that is why I have MySQL as a root here to, and I provide all the credentials for MySQL here, and it should be indented. So let's start this from scratch. So delete it from here also, delete it. So okay, so in here we go to source, main, resources. As you can see, right click here and go to new and go to file is here, and then give it a name. Under that resources, you can call it any name as far as it ends with YAML or .properties, but anyway, config is more descriptive, config.yaml. So I create this file. Now MySQL, for MySQL I want to provide the credentials. So host is all of them. The credentials should be put as a string, even if it is a number. It should be within quote, because it extracts it. It knows a port should be a number, then it goes from there and removes the quotes and takes the number. So this one, localhost, and what's the other one? Password. Mine is MuleSoft 2022, and user or username, you can give it whatever is more intuitive to you. Is root for MySQL. For my case, it is root. And database, I can call it database or dbase, is Northwind, because we want to connect to Northwind. And port, even if it is a number, we still put it in quotes. So the default port for MySQL is 3306. So we save this. These are, if I go here, these are the credentials I have used to connect to MySQL. If I show you here, I have host, localhost, port 3306, user is root, password is MuleSoft 2022, and database is Northwind. Okay, so I saved this. Then once we create this file, we have to tell it that the configuration, this is our configuration file. We have to tell it this is a configuration file. So we go here, and under global elements, go to global elements, and you click create, and then global configurations. Under global configurations, there is configuration properties. So I have to explicitly tell it that config.yaml contains global configuration properties. So click next. Now see here what it is saying on the top. What it says is references a file with configuration properties. Each property has a key and a value. The key can be referenced from the mule configuration files using the following semantics. So you see there is $, curly braces, key name. That is what we are going to do. So in here, if I just select here, the config.yaml file is here. This is the file that we just created, and I'm telling it this is my global configuration file. So when I do $, curly braces, something, it is going to check in this file, because I told it this is my configuration file. If I do like this and click OK, now I can come out. My database configuration is this one. As you can see, I have, this is a static. So rather than doing this one, rather than doing localhost, now I do $, curly braces, and MySQL.host. So when I do MySQL, it is going to go to this file. Let me close this. It is going to this file. Probably I can copy this code. and save it in here, show you side by side. So okay, in here, when I do my SQL, it will go to the configuration file. I have told it that my configuration file is a config.yaml. So when it will go to this file, then it will get my SQL here. Then it will go to the indented key here under my SQL. So my SQL.host is this value. My SQL.password is this value. My SQL.user is this value. My SQL.dbase is this value. And my SQL.port is this value. So that's what we are doing. Just copy this here and paste and replace this by port. You have to make sure that the keys are exactly as they are put in the configuration in the YAML file. And this one, for example, you can call it user or username or database or dbase and so on. So you have to make sure it is exactly like that. This one is also password, and here this is dbase. I saved it as dbase. I could have saved it as database also, but I have to make sure it is exactly as it is here because it is key name. So if I do this now, let's test the connection. If I do test connection, see test connection successful. That means it is able to connect to my SQL. So I can have, if I have multiple configurations, multiple applications, then I can put the configuration file in one file, or the configuration credentials, and point to that configuration file using this approach. And one thing, it is okay, I don't see the credentials here. The other thing is I can dynamically change it. If I change it in the central file, all of them will work fine. I don't need to come and make any static changes here. So this is configuration file, and you can have multiple configuration credentials here in one configuration file. For example, this one is for MySQL. Now let's add for local, for example, localhost. Next time we'll add for Postgres, but here I have localhost, the HTTP listener. It has a connector configuration as you see here. So here, host is localhost, port, for example, let's just have for port only 8081. This one also we can make it for zeros. Let's test. Can I? Okay, this one, oh, this is from just the drop down. I can change only this one and this one. So let's see for port, for example, and come here, and now this is a separate one, so it should not be indented. Okay, so here I call it my what shall I call it? My host, for example, or local host. I can call it my local host. My local host. Then indent by clicking tab, port, then 8081, and do like this. So and save this. I just need this one, my local host, and in this connector configuration, where is this one? HTTP listener connector configuration, come here, and this one, rather than putting 8081, I can put $, curly braces, my local host dot port, and then close it. Now I can test the connection. Test connection successful. So this way you can hide your credentials and also enable it to dynamically change when you make updates. Okay. Okay, so yeah, this is how we create configuration files. I have one question on that. Let me show you. And if you face any issues, by the way, if for example I didn't explain it well today, and if you want more resources, I have added a video here, that a YouTube video that I made some months back. So the question I have is this one. Let me first unmute you. Okay. So refer to the exhibits. What is valid text to set the user field in the database connector configuration to the username value specified in the config.yaml file. So the config.yaml is its content, as you see, is on the top right. There is dbase, and under it has host, username, and password. So in the connection,
C. The answer is
C. Okay.
Yeah.
$sign.
There.
It should start with $sign followed by curly braces. Then
The last one.
yeah, we use
The last one. The last one.
yeah, we use dot. Yeah, so $sign followed by curly braces, then followed by dots. Perfect. Yeah, that is how we create a configuration file. Desalegn, at some point he asked me about connecting to, I think it was AWS S3. It is the same thing.
Yeah, I understand it very well now. Exactly.
Okay, perfect.